What's up and happy mental push up Monday, baby. We here. And this is your first time joining. My name is Andrea Fitzgerald. I'm an author, a speaker, an educator, but also a person really obsessed with personal growth and development. So each week we get in the gym and we do our mental push-ups because the most challenging yet rewarding work that we will ever do is on ourselves. So we just here building off our greatness. The title of today's mental push-up is Stop the Telenovelas. And you may be saying to yourself, what the heck is a telenovela? Well, I learned about these when I went to New York with my fiance. Her aunt was watching these shows. They were kind of like soap operas. And I mean, she was really into it. So she told me, she said, oh yeah, these are the novellas. So basically, in short, the telenovelas are soap operas. So it made me think about when I was in college, I would fly from Memphis to Louisville, and then I'd ride home with my teammate, Katie Knable. Shout out to you. I appreciate the ride back then. But we would be sitting in the car, I think it was like 3 or 4 hours. And so you got to entertain yourself on this ride. So we would play this classical music. And as the classical music played, we would just come up with these stories, be like, oh, John, how could you do this to me? I mean, we had a whole soap opera going in the whip, like just pretending like the music was a whole story going. But it really speaks to the power of our mind. We can create all kinds of things up, right? I know I do this quite a bit with myself. Like something will happen and then I make up a whole story, be like, oh, well, it must mean this or it must mean that. You know, I like to call it, shout out to a few of my homies. We know Sybil. You know, Sybil, I like to call her. Sybil is like my inner mean girl. Like she makes up stories. She really goes on the deep end. Like when things happen, she goes worse. She automatically goes to worst possible scenario. And so oftentimes, if we are not checking the narratives and checking those stories that we create in our mind, that we can potentially be operating from that place. Like I know when I'm in that space or just in a story, that it's like it's almost like we're in a little rabbit hole. And the one thing I remember my therapist telling me that when in a rabbit hole, it doesn't feel great because it's hard to get out of it, but it's also stuck because you don't want to keep going down further. So today I just want to share a few tips on how to stop the telenovelas or the narratives or the stories that we're creating in our mind. So let's get right into it. So the first thing, let's just start with, I want you to think about maybe a narrative of a story either you have going right now or one you've had recently. We're going to operate from that lens, okay? Number one, take a breath and take the time to process. I think that this, to me, is one of the most beneficial and powerful things that I have just experienced with myself. Whenever I honor that space to just really think about what it is that I'm feeling, thinking, and doing, it just goes a lot better. Like I like to think of it when I play sports, when I play basketball, whenever another team was going on a run or we would get out of control or we getting away from my game plan, our coach would call a timeout. And it was an opportunity for him to bring us back together, to reset and get his troops like, okay, this is what we're trying to accomplish. This is the adjustments we got to make. And so I challenge you, like whenever you have those narratives or those stories come up, take that time out, take that space to be like, okay, let me really sit it and think about what's going on. So just give yourself the space to process, breathe, and think through it. Now, the other part of that is that the breathing really helps me get in my body. Because I can be so in my head that I'm just operating from that place or whatever story that I've constructed in my mind. Number two, after you have taken the space and give yourself permission to like be in your body and process, the next thing, number two, something to consider is questioning it. So when I say questioning, what I often use to kind of help me figure out what's going on, like the feelings and stuff like that of what's the root cause, is I use what I call a nester. And I learned this from Jason Gaddis. Shout out to you. Changed my life. But Jason Gaddis, he talked about a nester. And so with a nester, it stands for, the N is a number. Like the number is your level of your availability for connection. So if I'm at a 10, like I'm blown out, I can't talk, I can't figure it out, like I'm feeling a lot of emotion. But at 0, like I'm completely open. And the E is emotion. Like, what emotion am I feeling? What do I feel inside? And like really name it. Like, am I sad? Am I happy? Am I angry? And the sensation, like, what am I feeling in my body? Like, where do I feel in my body? Do I feel it in my shoulders? I know sometimes when I'm feeling like anxious, I feel it in my stomach. And the next thing is the thoughts. So what am I thinking? Like, and narrow it down, I would say, to like one sentence. Like, I'm thinking about ... because the story, that thing could go on forever. So I'd say narrow it down to 1 to 2 sentences. And then something that I added to it is, if I'm thinking this, the M, the meaning. Like, am I making a meaning about it? And am I making it mean something that it's not? And then R is the resource. So what resource can I use to get back in my body? Like, sometimes it can be like, I'm gonna go for a walk, or feeling like wiggling my toes, stuff like that, to just kind of question, like, what's really going on here, like getting down to the root cause of it. The next thing, after you've taken some space to really question it and really feel the feelings, is number 3 is to ask, is it true? Is it true, beloved? Because Sybil, worst case scenario. I'll tell you a story the other day. I mean, I'm talking about a whole story out here. Like, I'm working on a project and I had made up a story. It's like, well, maybe I didn't do a good job. Maybe this, maybe that. And really, it was just a narrative. When I called back and figured out everything, I was like, oh, it was cool. It was just something I made up in my head. It just wasn't true. And so I think something that often helps me is like considering that other people are dealing with other things too. Sometimes it's not about me, because sometimes our stories are things that we've made up, and really things that we have to explore more and figure out. So ask yourself, like, is it true? Most times it's not. It's just something that we made up, or even our old programming coming up, or even just sometimes it's healing that we got to do, right, to explore more. The next one, number 4, is what new narrative can I construct? So I have this story going, like this story that I have made up. I was like, am I really good at what I do? Is the question. And it wasn't true. The new narrative is something that I can be aware of moving forward is, sometimes I make things up when it feels unclear to me. And that's okay, right? And so what I have to do, instead of me jumping to the next thing moving forward, is that I have to take space and process, so that I'm not just going driven on a narrative. So that's the new thing. When things are unclear, I get a little anxious and I make things up. Okay, we're just gonna make some adjustments there, which leads to the last step. What can I do differently? Get into action. It doesn't have to be anything massive or big. Like, that's a very small one. We've been working on this thing for a little bit, processing time. And I'm noticing, the one thing that I'm noticing, like, no, I'm not 100% where I want to be. But the one thing that I'm starting to see when I process is I start to see some of my patterns in other people, right? When I look at what someone else is doing, I see it in myself. I'm like, oh, girl, we do that too. We do that too, and so it gives me more compassion, and it allows me, I'm finding that I'm more reflective because I'm taking that time to process. So the research says that our minds naturally go to the negative, like naturally. And so it's really important for us to really challenge those narratives, really take that time to process. And the telenovelas, they may pop in our mind, but it's really up to us to be intentional about the thinking that we have. So thank you all so much for tuning in. If you would, share, subscribe, like if you think this will really add some value. And this is the action step for you. I want you to drop in the comments, what is a story that you've got going as of late? Like, is there a story that you've created? Drop it in the comments. I want to hear from you. So thank you all so much for tuning in. I really appreciate y'all. And as I always say, be bold, be brave, and most importantly, friends, be you. And I'm out.